I'm here with Paula Bobbett, who is the Chief Digital Officer of Boots. Thanks so much for coming on the podcast. What we try and do is explore what digital is doing to, as it were, traditional businesses we're all very familiar with. Try and shine a light on how digital is transforming them, but also talk about careers in digital, because at Digital Futures we're focused on getting young people from hard to reach backgrounds into big companies. So we want to talk a bit about your career as well. So last time we met, I think you said you started at British Airways.
I did, yeah. Many years ago.
Straight out of university to British Airways.
That's right. And actually, my degree was actually in biochemistry, and I realised I would never ever be in a lab going forwards. So I stayed and did a master's in business, and British Airways used to recruit directly from the university.
Right.
And so I went into effectively an analyst role at British Airways. Brilliant grounding for a career. I was one of a team of 9 people recruited at a graduate level. I worked on Terminal 5, so figured out how big the passenger lounges should be and what the flight scheduling should look like. I used to do things like work out which aircraft to fly on which routes, so should we fly a 747 or a 777? Really fascinating and great grounding, and actually quite a lot of coding in that as well.
And were you doing some of the coding at this point?
I was.
Okay, we're going to talk about that. But what I find fascinating is when you were talking about your first job at British Airways was at the time, British Airways was a kind of pioneer in being digital.
I mean, yeah, I didn't actually start my career in digital, but in analytics, they were certainly pioneers in things like digital analytics.
Exactly.
And very forward-looking, actually, for a company back in that era.
So they were kind of working out which flights to put on and which flights were full, which flights were empty, and kind of configuring their flight schedule based on data analysis.
Yeah, huge analytics function, and actually at the time was one of the biggest, I think, in the UK. So they do things like yield management, so which flights, what price should they sell the seats at, and basically changing it based on demand, but equally using things like regression and cost modelling to figure out which flights are the best ones to fly, which are most cost effective. So a huge amount of analytics in all areas of the business, actually.
We could go down a rabbit hole, and I could ask you the best way to secure an upgrade on a British Airways flight. But was it scary for you? I mean, you're a scientist by background, so kind of numbers and things don't scare you. But was it scary for you to start coding, or was that the first time you started coding when you were at British Airways?
It was the first time I started coding, and I would definitely say it was a learning curve.
Yeah.
You know, it took a while to kind of get familiar with it. But ultimately, it's quite logical. Science is quite logical. And it was a brilliant way actually to make my own life easier. So, you know, coding and automating things speeds things up, so it takes away from having to do all the manual processes.
And was that something you kind of taught yourself to do at British Airways in terms of, you said, I'm going to make my job easier, so I'm going to work out how to automate this task, or was it something that kind of was part of the kind of training at the...
So we were very lucky to have a great training program, so starting with the fundamentals of coding. But then I guess what I found throughout my career is actually how you can use it to make your life easier. So when I was at Debenhams, I used to have to do a task that took me all day, and I automated it with code and it took me half an hour. So It's definitely a bonus, you know, having that background and being able to use that code to really change things and make your life easier ultimately.
And where did you go after British Airways?
So I did a year in public sector consultancy.
Oh.
Never again.
As in working with government?
Yes, yes. And then I moved on to Debenhams, so I was there for 4 years. Phenomenal job in retail. Actually, again, a company that were quite forward-looking in terms of data. Very early in the digital journey as well, so early they didn't even have automated recommendations on the website, so those were us figuring out which things people should put together on the website based on data and analytics. But that largely was looking at supporting the retail functions through data and analysis to improve performance, so whether that be buying and merchandising or supply chain.
And I'm so old that I can't work out when retailers started using websites, but was this at a point when people were getting used to buying online in terms of
it was
shopping?
Very early, early 2000s, I would say. So yeah, it was a very small part of the business at the time because everyone was still shopping in department stores and offline.
And so this again was another company where you were kind of pioneering.
Yep.
And what were the kind of things you were learning at Debenhams in terms of understanding how people interacted with a retailer online?
A lot of it, I guess, was mainly around how people were purchasing. Yeah. So less, I think, focused at that time in terms of the metrics we use now around traffic conversion, average order value. It was almost treating it more like a store. So, having a website front door, which is more like a store front door. Obviously, times have moved on quite a lot since then. But it was largely about understanding buying behaviours.
And was this at a time when you could hear the drumbeats of Amazon knocking on your door? Did anyone have any idea that kind of e-commerce was going to explode in this way?
Not at that point in time. I think it was still, everyone was sort of dabbling. They weren't really sure that it was going to become a big thing. Yeah. I think Amazon at the time only really sold books. That's where they started out, and it was starting to gain momentum, but still early days.
And then where did you go after Debenhams? So you did 4 years at Debenhams?
4 years at Debenhams. Then I went to a very small consultancy, and I worked a lot in Japan.
And by this time you're firmly a retailer?
Firmly a retailer. I mean, the consultancy was, again, more data-driven, but I worked with Coca-Cola out in Japan for about 2 years, travelling back and forwards. Again, more on the data side, less on the digital side. But that's a phenomenal brand to work with in terms of their understanding of the customer, how they use data to even drive which products they're going to make.
Yeah.
So the Japan market is really unique in terms of having to have huge amounts of innovation. So we were using data to come up with a whole new product that you could drink in the car, cold coffee. Sounds disgusting, but...
No, I love cold coffee. It's cold, sweet coffee.
Cold, sweet coffee, very sugary.
I mean, I've been to Japan 3 times and people always say it's the one country in the world where you can go where the experience is very, very different from what one is used to in terms of Europe. Because obviously if you go to the US, it's pretty familiar, and actually quite a lot of other places around the world. But so getting an insight into the Japanese customer compared to the European customer, if I can put it that way.
Yeah, I mean, totally different. It looks actually, when you go, it looks very Western, but the minute you turn around the corner, you're in a completely different culture. And the biggest advice I can give is you always look up, because nothing is ever on ground level. Everything is high rise. All the restaurants are up, a lot of the shops are up.
That's an interesting point. I hadn't thought about that.
And the customers are very, very different. They're very much into innovation, quick change, and they have very different, obviously, routines to what you'd see in the UK. They're actually generally a population as well who do activities in clusters. So if you go to Yoyogi Koen, you'll have a section for photography, a section for football, a section for dance. No one really mixes within that. It's really interesting.
And so once you've accumulated enough air miles, seen all your old colleagues at British Airways, what do you do after that?
So then I went to Avon.
Yeah.
And I would say that's one of the experiences that probably maybe shaped my future, because I realised at that point that I didn't like to work in an industry that wasn't very data-driven. It wasn't very data-driven. It certainly wasn't very digital. And I guess, you had those highs and lows in your career. This was probably quite a low point, but probably a good point to reset. So I came out of there and joined Dixon's Carphone, and that is where I fell in love with digital. I was only supposed to be there for a maternity contract. It was my first proper foray into digital. And in my first 2 days, I would say that I thought, I hate this and I'm never ever going to do this. And within a week, I totally fell in love. And for lots of different reasons.
I want to hear them. This is amazing.
Yeah, so one, obviously data. You can see that throughout my career. 2, being able to see the impact of your actions. So you can try something and very quickly you know whether or not it works. Yeah. And often when you're in an analytical career, you tell someone else the information and the insight and they decide what to do with it. But in digital, you get to decide what to do with it. And you get to see the actions. You can test and learn really easily. And also, what it also unlocked for me, I think, is more the creative side of myself. So although I started in digital analytics, I quickly moved to online trading, and that's a real blend of using data to drive decision making, to drive sales, but equally it's having to understand how you lay out a journey for a customer, what kind of messages are going to attract people, what creative actually makes sense, and obviously you can test and learn on that as well. But it was a real I suppose, eye-opener in terms of being able to do something that leads to an action, but equally instantly see those results, and you've got to focus in terms of that commerciality of knowing whether you're performing well or not. So I did online trading at Currys for a couple of years. I then inherited Car Phone Warehouse and our eBay business. And then in the pandemic, I was put in charge of the whole of Dixon's Car Phone e-commerce. And I still remember my first day where all of our stores were closed, and suddenly we'd gone from being an omnichannel retailer to a pure play overnight. And there were 40,000 people out there of our staff who were relying on us making sure that we got that right. So how much of the sales could we recover given all of our stores were closed? The most phenomenal experience. And then in the background trying to homeschool my children and do all of the other things. But you know, I think collectively the whole business got behind trying to make that a success. And I think we recovered something like 80% of store sales. So it was amazing how that single-minded focus really changes a business and drives it forwards. And how also, in terms of the speed of developing things, we launched Shop Live within about 8 weeks. We launched contactless click and collect within about 8 weeks. It really changed momentum for the digital business and actually the way people thought about it as well.
I want to talk a lot about Boots as well, but I just want to explore a couple of points you've raised. One is the difference. How do you explain the difference between data and digital? So data is basically where you're crunching the numbers. You're a data analyst. You're working out who's buying what and what demographic and where they live and all that kind of thing, and kind of working out which product might sell better in a particular area. And digital is about effectively the kind of the customer experience online. Yeah,
I would say that data is the lifeblood of digital.
Yeah.
So most decisions with digital are made using data to really drive it, because you have billions of rows of data to do that. But digital is largely about the commercial elements of it in terms of driving sales, the execution, and also the customer journey and the experience online.
And I'm also interested in what you keep mentioning creativity, which I think is really fascinating. So it's kind of one of the big debates, the divide between tech and culture, if you like, and the arts. And one of the things I always bang on about, and a lot of people actually bang on about, is you can't really have one without the other. You can have all the best tech in the world, but if you're not creative with how you kind of present it, it's not going to have an impact.
Yeah.
So did you kind of discover your creative side through this journey? How does it work?
Do you know what? It was a really uncomfortable journey, actually, because I was so used to making decisions based on the numbers that I've read and the insights that I've acquired. To then say, well, actually, is that creative going to be good for the customer or not? Is quite uncomfortable. It's quite uncomfortable. But over time, I think for me, I learned some of it is common sense. I'm a customer too, so how would my customer think about it? How would I think about it? And also you leverage the strength of the creative people you do have in your team. But I do think digital isn't just about data and analysis. It requires creativity as well, creativity to get your customers engaged. And largely digital now has moved away from being a transactional experience to much more of an experiential experience. Customers don't just want to come and buy stuff, they want to be inspired and engaged, and actually that's a whole new lens to how we do digital now.
Again, as another rabbit hole I could disappear down. I mean, one of the things that drives me absolutely nuts, for example, as somebody who reads a lot about politics, is how bad the kind of news websites are. You get these terrible pop-up adverts, which presumably you don't get when you go on a Boots website.
Well, you definitely don't get the pop-ups. I mean, one of the things, and that is definitely a trend in digital, is monetization of websites.
Exactly.
So, the perennial challenge that we have being part of a digital part of, an omnichannel retailer, is stores are considered to be more profitable. So, because of the cost of distribution. So, how do you make your website more profitable? You need to find a way to make money through other ways. So monetization and personalization, that's the key thing, is that you're not just showing, when you go to the Daily Mail, generally you get an awful pop-up and it's not necessarily relevant. But with retail monetization of websites, you can target it to particular audiences. So you're working really hand in hand with your suppliers about, if we know that this is a beauty customer, what is the best advertising message that we can give them that's relevant. And I think that's the key. It has to be relevant, not just spam.
And that's really interesting. And in terms of where you are now at Boots, what is the kind of digital strategy that you're trying to implement that you can talk about publicly, as it were?
I mean, Boots has been on a massive transformation journey. So they probably started it around about 2019, 2020. And I think the pandemic massively accelerated it, obviously like most businesses. But they were already on the journey of kind of automating the warehouse, being able to have more capacity through the website. But they were still very much in very sort of early stages. They weren't investing in driving as much traffic as I'd expect. They had a number of functionalities that were quite limited in terms of what a customer would expect. So we always say, if you go and visit a website and you have a brilliant experience, you then expect that from your next website that you visit. So if you don't get it, it has a big impact in terms of that customer experience. So there's sort of 3 or 4 pillars of what we're trying to achieve. One is I want the website to be as convenient as our stores. So, there's a Boots everywhere, on a high street, airport, train station. We can leverage the strength of that in order for our customers to be able to collect things really quickly, and use that as well to do, distribution for things like same day delivery. So, for example, we have Deliveroo now because we've got stores, which means that a customer can effectively get those medicines to their home in sometimes 20 minutes. So there's a convenience element for me. There's digital experience. So I referenced the fact we're trying to move away from being purely transactional to much more experiential. And that's particularly important in the beauty space, where you're trying to inspire people with different looks or different trends. And add those things that customers expect to see in terms of the types of payment methods or the customer journey. There's also our app. So I like to say the app's the star of the show. It was about 10% of our sales pre-pandemic. It's now closer to 30.
Really?
Yeah, it's huge. Absolutely huge. And obviously that's where the digital advantage card sits. But what we've tried to do is to make that experience better and better, to make our customers stickier. But equally, it starts to become the connector between the physical and the digital. So we're going to introduce features, or we are introducing a feature hopefully next week, where you can go into a store and scan a barcode and read more information about the product. So you start to get that real connection between the stores and the online business. We're equally looking at as well how we expand our range. So I think we have a really huge umbrella that we can work under. So our purpose is with you for life. At the moment, we have about 30,000 products. My feeling is we could have about 100,000.
Yeah, I was about to say, kind of 2 sides of the same coin. One is, how do you stop people doing everything on Amazon? So buying kind of the basic hygiene products that they want from Amazon because they're buying a book or a stereo or whatever. Because you're in a sector, as it were. And so one of the strategies is to just you can significantly increase the product offering.
Yeah, Amazon is an absolutely brilliant business, and it's so effective in terms of going on there, shopping, checking out, but it's not a brilliant inspirational business. Like if you want something quickly, perfect, but if you actually want to be inspired, or if you want, further depth and information, it's actually difficult to get it from Amazon. So by being able to own more of that beauty space and healthcare space, I think we've got a huge opportunity.
And how does that, in terms of the kind of wider Boots strategy, which is enabled by digital, things like healthcare, I find it an enormous pain dealing with my GP. Having to renew my prescriptions constantly, I have to ring them up, I have to go in for, I keep telling ministers to kind of make certain prescription drugs like statins just available over the counter, but that's another thing. But you can move into that area, couldn't you?
We've
for
already
kind of relatively routine ailments, if I can put it that way.
We're already very much making inroads into that area. So we have a health hub, which effectively is loads of condition-led advice. But as well as having the advice on there, you can actually get access to the products. So we have an online doctor, so you can get prescriptions for some of the, more basic stuff through the online doctor. And you can generally get it same day. Yeah, we also have a virtual GP service, so so you can use that as well. And we also have a prescription service, so you can actually sign up for it and it'll automatically send it to your boots.
Well, I'm going to start exploring all of this.
There you
go. Because, I mean, it is a kind of huge debate, obviously, as you know, the future of the NHS and the pressure the NHS is under. And we live in a country where, weirdly, you can't talk about commercial retailers like Boots, even though you're more trusted than the NHS, about how they can pick up the slack, as it were.
It's a very tricky situation. What we see ourselves is supporters of the NHS, being able to pick up some of the things that maybe are taking away from a lot more of the serious conditions. And as you know, the government are pushing anyway, like community pharmacies as an area to go to before you go to your GP. So we have a huge opportunity in that space, and we're very open to working more closely with the NHS.
Can I switch back to engineering? So you're a biochemist who kind of learnt to code on the job. Did you ever do any kind of formal coding training, or?
I did some
I
training.
couldn't imagine teaching myself to code, by the way.
I did have a little bit of training in terms of things like Microsoft Visual Basic, SQL, that kind of thing. But I guess over time you learn more and more. You start with the basics, but you kind of grow your knowledge the more that you need to do. Don't ask me to code now because I probably can't remember.
And can I ask the difference? So at Digital Futures, we have cloud, data and software engineering. We spend a lot of time on, you obviously recruit data engineers, and a data engineer basically crunches the data and turns it into something that is usable. Are you doing a lot? Do you need cloud engineers? Do you do a lot in the cloud as a big retailer? Is that now a core part of the digital business? So
definitely as a retailer, a lot of us are moving a lot of our infrastructure to the cloud because it makes sense from a scalable point of view. So I believe we're actually recruiting for cloud engineers at the moment. So we're definitely moving in that direction. And I think, most businesses will be moving from on-premise to cloud. So there's definitely huge opportunity in that in the future.
And in terms of software engineers, I mean, presumably, do you buy 80% of your software off the shelf and tailor it and make it bespoke, 10%, 20%? How does it work?
Yeah, so our current platform is a monolith. So we have, people that code that, but equally we have our own customer experience platform, which is developed in-house. So you've got a bit of a balance. It's not just off-the-shelf stuff. Actually, we do use people as well in-house to help develop some of our products.
And what will they be doing, as it were? What will they be doing that is necessary for you to do in-house, as it were, that you can't buy off the shelf these days?
I think we, as Boots, see ourselves as quite unique. I mean, there's not many retailers like us who have both the healthcare and the retail side of things. So there's a lot of bespoke things that we require that, kind of fit into the healthcare retail niche. And we need people therefore to be able to build bespoke code for us to, I guess, fit what we want to do as a brand.
So you've gone out on panels and so on and talked about inclusivity in digital, the need to recruit more women into digital. At Digital Futures, that's what we focus on, as well as people from hard to reach backgrounds who wouldn't necessarily think about a company like Boots as being a company they could work for on the digital side. What is your thinking in this area at the moment? Is it changing? Are you leaning into it from your position?
So I still don't think it's changing fast enough, if I'm honest.
Yeah, be honest. This is good.
So I sit on the Women's Business Resource Group. I'm the exec sponsor at Boots, because I'm absolutely passionate about women in business and women in data and digital and technology. I think there are still so many barriers to overcome. And what's always really interesting is that the proportion of women at the start of the career, where it's mainly like sometimes 50-50, and then when you get to senior positions and it's 10-90. Yeah. And there are so many fundamental things to overcome. There is, childcare and the fact that it's super expensive. There's that traditional role model of what a woman should and shouldn't do. I think there's also, actually starts very young, about how we talk to our children. So I have 2 sons and a daughter. I've been absolutely shocked by seeing the messages given to my daughter versus those given to my son, the way that people talk about being bossy versus assertive, or even, going into a shop and buying clothes. The girls are all unicorns, rainbows, and the boys are all spaceships and rockets. Like, we're educating from a very young age to put people off doing things that are data or technology driven. Yeah. So there's a fundamental culture shift that needs to happen before we even get to the point of putting people in the workplace.
And is weirdly, I mean, I'll ask a series of stupid questions because I always feel embarrassed given my own background, but does digital in a way help? Because one of the things I was struck by during the pandemic, for example, is a lot of companies that had like physical call centres, as an example. BT was really interesting on this. I thought, they implemented technology very rapidly because people couldn't come into the office, and then they discovered, of course, that it made life much easier for women employees who didn't then have to travel into a call centre. How much of your team is kind of able to be kind of semi-virtual? I know that you're probably, presumably, like most people, you want people to come physically into the office for training and just mentoring and all that kind of thing. But presumably it does make people's life easier if they can spend 3 days at home doing coding.
So I'm a massive believer in hybrid working and the power of digital to enable that, because I think what it does is it creates an environment where you can be so much more inclusive, whether that be women or people who wanted to work different shift patterns, or people who want a very different balance with their lives. Digital enables that because you can work from anywhere at any point in time. Yes, of course, there's still a role for the office. Like, I think particularly sometimes with new people and young people, you still need that learning by osmosis. You still need to be surrounded by people with the experience. But equally, to your point, if someone can work remotely, which enables them to do school pickup and school drop off, that makes a huge difference to who's going to stay in the workplace or not. And I've had examples from previous companies where I've had someone who only came in the office once a week because she couldn't manage childcare and doing her job, but she was brilliant at her job. It would be such a waste to say, well, if you're not in the office 3 days a week, you can't work for us. Yeah. So I really think that is going to enable a huge amount of inclusivity going forwards.
And in terms of what you're trying to do at Boots, are you frustrated in the sense that when it comes to recruiting people who may be coming out of university, you have a narrow field of recruits, because to put it bluntly, a lot of the women have been put off doing a kind of digital career, in their teens? Is it something that you feel you need to go kind of back to, get into secondary schools to engage? Or
I actually think it needs to almost start from primary schools. Like, what are the messages we are telling our children? What are the opportunities we're giving them? How do we, tell them that it doesn't have to be all unicorns and rainbows? It can be spaceships. You can be a NASA engineer. It's those different messages that I think almost like culturally don't get through from the start. So yes, being a secondary school and talking about it, but actually it's almost the way that we talk to our children right from the very beginning that's going to make a massive difference.
Brilliant. I always ask people on the podcast, minister for a day. So you've got your world domination. You've got a magic wand. You can implement any policy you like. So apart from running the NHS and the education system, if you had 1, 2 or 3 things that you would really, and obviously you're not going to do it in a day, but you know what I mean, that you'd really like to see change if you were the Prime Minister running the government, what kind of things would they be? You've given a fair indication already.
Well, number one, definitely much cheaper childcare, because I think that's such a huge barrier to women staying in work and progressing. What else would I do? Well,
is there anything on digital skills, for example? Is there, regardless of the female issue, just how we teach digital in the UK, and a company like yours, which presumably faces the same recruitment issues that a lot of companies?
Yeah, I do think actually having that as something that you can learn during secondary school or even primary school. Children now are completely digital natives, right? They're certainly, my children are better at using the iPad than I am. Yeah. So enabling them to start coding early, getting interested early, I think that fundamental digital education from an early age is really important. And particularly as And my son's school says this a lot. They say, oh, you know, well, your kids are going to be doing jobs that don't exist, you know, today. Which is true, but equally I do a job that didn't exist when I was at school.
Yeah, it's amazing to hear your journey.
It's about how you enable education to stay open-minded. So how you teach skills around curiosity, digital, that enable people to keep self-learning, because I think that's the way to get people into new careers. And that learning needs to be lifelong, not just starting at graduate level.
Do you go in and guest lecture at business schools and things?
I haven't, no.
You should do. Amazing.
Oh, it would...
It'd be really fascinating.
Okay. I shall add that to my list.
Yeah, exactly. You haven't got enough to do, so... Brilliant, Paula. Thanks so much. I really enjoyed that.
No, thank you so much for having me.
That was great. Thanks very much.
Thank you.